Oh my God, who's on that fucking list? Is Trump on there? Bill is on there for sure. But who else? Do they know about me? Breathe, Epstein, breathe, Officer Michael Thomas would yell in his own panic on August 10, 2019. Jeffrey Epstein, the pedophile, was found unresponsive with an orange noose fashioned from the scraps the Federal Bureau of Prisons calls a shirt and a blanket. He was dangling from the bed, and Officer Michael Thomas knew that there would be hell to pay if the high-profile prisoner took his last breath in a federal prison cell at MCC, New York. He would look at his partner and in a hushed tone would tell him, "We're going to be in a lot of trouble." The federal sex trafficking charges he was facing were all over with now. His blood left on the razor wire in a desolate place. When investigators searched his prison cell after his death, they would find extra bed sheets, another mattress, and a noose. But with his death, would everyone else involved in his underage explicits be safe? Only time would tell. Was it a conspiracy? Did someone get rid of old Jeff, or did Jeff do it himself? On August 10th, the Inspector General said Epstein was in his cell at 8 p.m. Prison staff said he made an unrecorded call on a landline that was not monitored by prison communications. Epstein told the officers he was calling as a mother, and according to reports, his mother had already died long before that day. After 10:40 p.m., Epstein was not checked on, nor was he monitored, until officers discovered him hanging from his cell many hours later. But this was not the first time that he wanted to take himself out, or was it? In July 2019, he made an attempt to take his own life, but was unsuccessful. Epstein arrived at the Metropolitan Correctional Center on July 6, 2019. He spent 20 hours in the jail's general population before officials moved him to the special housing unit due to the significant increase in media coverage and awareness of his notoriety among other prisoners. Locked in what they call the special housing unit, which is nothing more than solitary confinement, he was alone with his thoughts, and it is a lonely place. Epstein complained about his placement in the SHU and was even more pissed. He had to wear an orange jumpsuit. He complained about being treated like he was a bad guy, despite being well-behaved behind bars. In his mind, what he had been involved in did not make him a bad guy, but other people, and society itself, thought differently. He requested a brown uniform for his near-daily visits with his lawyers. At 66 years old Jeff could not believe that this was what fate had for him. All his money could not get him out of this one. Shit was real. You see, Jeff, in Florida, your money got you out of the same charges back in 2008. And the prospect of federal charges disappearing was part of that deal. But once the feds have their hooks in, they never really let go, Epstein. They always got a hold of you. Jeff was running from the truth and the embarrassment that was coming and had come from his exploits in the world of chomoism. Prison officials knew that he was a danger to himself. Prior to his death, there was an email sent out by the Inspector General making clear that old Jeff was never to be housed alone, that he was to always have a cellmate. But like most things in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, orders only last a little while, and before long, no one pays attention to the orders because they're easily forgotten. On August 8th, Epstein's cellmate was moved and no one was put there in his place. Now Epstein was left alone, locked in a cell with only his thoughts and fears. Where were the prison cops when Epstein was contemplating it all? Thoughts of the dangers he faced among other convicts, given his charges, the prospect of a 45-year sentence, which was life anyway for him, the embarrassment all played in his mind, as they did the first time he tried to end it all. But now, a federal judge unsealed about 2,000 pages of documents in a sexual abuse lawsuit against him. The embarrassment was mounting, eroding his mental health. All this combined with a lack of significant interpersonal connections and the idea of potentially spending his life in prison were likely factors contributing to the moment he made sure that he would take his last breath. Breathe, Epstein, breathe! The letter he left behind complained about the wrongs that were done to him, such as large bugs crawling on his body, guard Tova Noel allegedly giving him burnt food, and a guard intentionally locking him in a shower cell without clothes for an hour. On August 8th, Epstein signed his last will and testament, witnessed by 2 attorneys who knew him. The will named 2 longtime employees as executors and immediately gifted all his assets and any assets remaining in his estate to a trust. Did the lawyers know what was coming? As the guards were distributing breakfast shortly after 6:30 a.m. on the morning of August 10th, Epstein was found, unresponsive and cardiac arrest in his cell. He was found in a kneeling position with a strip of bed sheet wrapped around his neck. The sheet was tied to the top of his bunk. He was believed to have been dead for about 2 hours by then. The guards performed CPR on Epstein. At 6:33 a.m., the guards pulled an alarm notifying their supervisor. Epstein hung himself. Breathe, Epstein, breathe! No, Officer Thomas. He will breathe no more. The world has been riddled of this putrid filth. And you, Officer Thomas, will also face consequences for Jeff's actions, and your own, of course. Sucking taxpayer dollars to do a job, and you're sleeping, while this high-profile prisoner asphyxiates himself. This is too high profile, and now someone has to pay for these transgressions. And of course, you falsified documents and records to try and cover your tracks, all to no avail. Breathe, Epstein, breathe. Due to violations of normal jail procedures on the night of Epstein's death, the malfunction of 2 cameras in front of his cell, and his claims to have compromising information about powerful figures, his death would generate speculation and conspiracy theories throughout the world about the possibility that he was murdered. Other theories claimed his death was feigned. In November 2019, the contested nature of his death spawned the Epstein didn't kill himself internet meme. Public opinion polls suggest that only a small percentage of Americans believe that Epstein committed suicide. One such poll saw 16% of respondents saying they believe Epstein committed suicide, 45% believing he was murdered, and 39% of the people being unsure. As a result of Epstein's death, all charges against him were dismissed, and ongoing sex trafficking investigations shifted attention to his alleged associates, notably Ghislaine Maxwell, who was arrested and indicted in July 2020 and convicted on 5 sex trafficking-related counts on December 29, 2021, just days after her birthday. Miss Maxwell was the door to the unknown and the fear of the light being exposed. Maxwell was born on Christmas Day, 1961 in France. She was a bundle of joy and a Christmas gift all in one. In the 1980s, she attended a college at Oxford and became a prominent member of London's social scene. Maxwell worked for her father until his death in 1991. She then would move to New York City, where she continued living as a socialite and had a relationship with Epstein. Just because you won't breathe, Epstein, does not mean that this is over. Many of your friends and associates are on their way down. At dawn on July 2nd, 2020, a team of more than a dozen FBI agents arrested Miss Maxwell at the New Hampshire home, where she had taken refuge after Epstein's death to escape the upsurge of highly intrusive media coverage that had engulfed her and her family. She relocated alone, separating from her family to safeguard her husband and 2 young stepchildren, as if she should have been around them anyway, and to secure the personal safety of her family and herself. At that time, Miss Maxwell was the target of numerous death threats and threats of violence and was being hunted by the press. One media outlet even offered $10,000 bounty for information about her whereabouts. Tragically for her, according to her lawyers, this experience was not new for Miss Maxwell. Decades earlier, when Miss Maxwell was just a child and her father was a member of the Parliament, UK, authorities found a hit list of potential kidnapping and assassination targets in a safe house used by the Irish Republican Army. Miss Maxwell's name was first on the list. This unnerving experience had haunted her, heightening her vigilance and concerns about the welfare and safety, according to her lawyer, of her young stepchildren, who were being hounded by the media at school and at the beach, and her husband, who was besieged by media coverage and had lost his employment and professional relationships. Miss Maxwell was also worried for herself, having legitimate reason to fear for her own life. Was she and is she just a scapegoat in Jeff's escapades? Or did she deserve what was to come? 20 years in federal prison. Federal prosecutors would paint a different picture than the defense attorneys. To them, Miss Maxwell played an instrumental role in the horrific sexual abuse of multiple young teenage girls. As part of a disturbing agreement with Jeffrey Epstein, Maxwell identified, groomed, and abused multiple victims, while she enjoyed a life of extraordinary luxury and privilege. In her wake, Maxwell left her victims permanently scarred with emotional and psychological injuries. That damage can never be undone, but it can be accounted for, prosecutors would say, in crafting a just sentence for Maxwell's crimes. And all of this would lead to a lawsuit and the naming of the elite who were involved in abusing young teenage girls. In 1994 up until 2014, Jeffrey Epstein would entice minors to travel to engage in illegal sex acts. Beginning in approximately 91, the Maxwell and Epstein, the two had a close relationship. Maxwell was Epstein's girlfriend for many years until in or about the early 2000s. After that point, Maxwell and Epstein remained close friends. For over a decade, Maxwell traveled with Epstein, a multimillionaire, on his private planes and mingled with rich and famous people. As Maxwell wrote in an essay, she and Epstein were a couple who were rarely apart, great partners, and the best of friends. Maxwell enjoyed a life of extraordinary luxury with Epstein. Maxwell and Epstein spent time together in Epstein's various properties, including his mansion on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, his villa in Palm Beach, his ranch in New Mexico, his apartment in Paris, and his private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands. During the time frame of the conspiracy, Maxwell received exceptional benefits from Epstein. Beyond the lavish lifestyle that she enjoyed side by side with Epstein, Maxwell also received a townhouse that Epstein bought for her in New York City, and Epstein transferred a total of approximately $23 million to Maxwell during the time frame of the conspiracy. In addition to her role as Epstein's girlfriend, Maxwell also supervised Epstein's household and enjoyed a lifestyle of extraordinary wealth. Maxwell relished her role as the lady of the house. When Maxwell took charge of Epstein's homes, she imposed strict rules for staff. For example, Maxwell helped author and implement a household manual, which contained rules for operating the Palm Beach house to anticipate the needs of Mr. Epstein, Miss Maxwell, and their young guests. Staff were directed to have 2 sizes of notepads marked Ghislaine Maxwell and Lady Ghislaine. In addition to Epstein's notepads, staff were also instructed on Epstein and Maxwell's breakfast preferences and the items to keep in Epstein and Maxwell's respective bathrooms. Maxwell's instructions extended to massages. She specified the massage oils and lotions for the Palm Beach house. In short, Maxwell was waited on hand and foot. To protect her criminal activities from exposure, Maxwell also fostered a culture of silence at Epstein's homes. The Palm Beach household manual made clear that staff were to see nothing, hear nothing, say nothing, except to answer a question directed at that staff member. Maxwell reinforced the messages of the household manual. She directed Juan Alessi, the former manager of Epstein's Palm Beach villa, to speak to Epstein only when spoken to and not to look Epstein in the eyes. Alessi would explain during trial testimony that he understood he was to be blind, deaf, and dumb, and to say nothing of their lives. This culture of silence provided space for Maxwell and Epstein to operate a playbook through which they sexually abused young girls. At trial, Dr. Lisa Rashiro, an expert in psychology with a specialized expertise in traumatic stress and interpersonal violence, explained that children are most frequently abused through grooming or coercion in the context of a relationship. She would also explain that the abusers use a series of deceptive tactics to engage a child in that abuse. Maxwell and Epstein used such tactics throughout the life of the conspiracy. In the early phase of the conspiracy, from at least 1994 through 2001, Maxwell identified vulnerable girls, typically from single mother households in difficult financial circumstances. Maxwell and Epstein then isolated the girls, spending time with them away from their family and friends. During that time, they groomed the girls through techniques such as giving them gifts, pretending to be friends, and building trust. Maxwell and Epstein then normalized sexual situations and sexual touching. Finally, they would transition to sexual abuse, often through the pretext of giving Epstein a massage. This earlier phase required Maxwell and Epstein to identify one girl at a time to target for grooming and abuse. In the later phase, from 2001 to 2004, Maxwell and Epstein developed a scheme that created a constant stream of girls who recruited each other to visit Epstein at his Palm Beach residence, and sometimes some of his elite friends. This new approach replaced some of the early grooming and trust-building steps with money provided to girls from struggling families. Specifically, Maxwell and Epstein would pay young girls hundreds of dollars in cash in exchange for meeting Epstein to be abused, again often under the pretext of giving him a simple massage. Once a girl was introduced to these massages, she was offered more money if she brought other girls to engage in the same massages with Epstein. As a result, Maxwell and Epstein no longer had to identify and recruit victims themselves. Indeed, they used money to convince impoverished girls to bring other victims to provide Epstein with his desires. Once the girls were in Epstein's home, Maxwell engaged in grooming behavior that normalized the massages that were taking place with Epstein, some with no clothes on. The trial evidence focused on 6 girls who suffered abusive sexual contact as a result of Maxwell's criminal actions: Jane, Kate, Annie, Carolyn, Virginia, and Melissa. Epstein, in true Chomo fashion, met Jane when she was just 14 years old in the summer of 1994 at a summer camp for talented kids. Jane was particularly vulnerable as her father had just passed away, a fact which she had told both Epstein and Maxwell upon meeting them. And her family was struggling financially. She was the perfect victim for both Jeff and Maxwell. They both would do the unthinkable in Epstein's rooms and just continued with others. Annie Farmer was 16 when Maxwell and Epstein took her to a ranch in New Mexico for a retreat for a group of 20 to 25 students, both boys and girls. They were academically gifted to discuss college plans and international trips. Annie did not want to go to New Mexico, after Epstein had previously caressed and held Annie's hand and rubbed her foot and leg while watching a movie at a theater in New York in December 1995. Despite those misgivings, Annie felt more comfortable going to New Mexico once she understood that Maxwell, a grown woman in a romantic relationship with Epstein, would be there with Annie. Yet when Annie found herself alone at Epstein's ranch in New Mexico, with just Epstein and Maxwell, she found that Maxwell was anything but a protector. Instead, Annie found that the purpose of the trip was to groom her for sexual abuse, and so it went. Breathe, Epstein, breathe! Maxwell's access to wealth enabled her to present herself as a supposedly respectable member of society who rubbed shoulders with royalty, presidents, and celebrities. That same wealth dazzled the girls from struggling families who became Maxwell and Epstein's victims. That same wealth enabled her and Epstein to hire a parade of staff to transport victims and maintain the fabulous properties where those victims were abused. That same wealth motivated Maxwell to make sure that Epstein's repulsive desire for sexual contact with teenage girls was always met. That wealth was her reward. Maxwell had lived a life of extraordinary privilege, and she profited from her relationship with Epstein at the detriment of young girls. Was 20 years enough for Maxwell, or should she have gotten life? Breathe, Epstein, breathe! That wealth also led to a lawsuit by a victim, Virginia Guffrey. Guffrey was a victim just like the rest, but now she would sue. And with that lawsuit, many powerful names would come to light. Some would speculate, is Trump on that list? How about Bill, the Prince? Who else? Who are these powerful and influential chomos? The magician David Copperfield, Prince Andrew, former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, actor Kevin Spacey, no surprise. Lawyer Alan Dershowitz, not surprised. The late New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson, Naomi Campbell, Michael Jackson, are you surprised he made the list? And former Vice President Al Gore, the man who wanted to save the earth. What is happening and what was going on? Did they believe that this world they dabbled in would never be explored? The list goes on. Some are named as victims. Others employees and people with just a passing connection to the scandal. Others are still fighting to hide their identity. Ghislaine Maxwell, Virginia Lee Roberts, Kathy Alexander, Miles Alexander, James Michael Ostrich, Philip Barden, number 7 is redacted, Kate Blanchett, David Boies, Laura Booth, Evelyn Boulette, Rebecca Boylan, Joshua Bunner, Naomi Campbell, Carolyn Casey, Paul Cassell, Sharon Churcher, the infamous Bill Clinton, David Copperfield, Alexandra Costu, Cameron Diaz shows up on the list at 21, Leonardo DiCaprio, Alan Dershowitz, Dr. Mona Davanson. Number 25 is redacted. Bradley Edwards, Amanda Ellison, Kimberly Espinosa, Jeffrey Epstein, Annie Farmer, Mary Farmer, Alexandra Fouquet, Crystal Figueroa, Anthony Figueroa, Louis Freeh, Eric Gainey, Mag Garvin, Sheridan Gibson, Robert Guffrey, Al Gore, Ross Goh, Fred Graff, Philip Godwin, number 44 is redacted. Shannon Harrison, Stephen Hawking, Victoria Hazel, Brittany Henderson, Brett Jaff, Michael Jackson, Moonwalking, at number 50. Carol Roberts Kess, Dr. Karen Kitkoff, Peter Listerman, George Lucas, Tony Lyons, Bob Meister, Jamie A. Melanson, Lynn Miller, Marvin Minsky. Number 60 is redacted and still hiding. David Mullen, Joe Pagano, Mary Paluga, J. Stanley Pottinger, Joseph Riccari, Michael Ritter, Jason Richards, Bill Richardson, Sky Roberts, Scott Rothstein, Forrest Sawyer, Doug Schottel, Kevin Spacey again, Cecilia Stein, Mark Tafoya, Brett Tyndale, Kevin Thompson, and not the infamous Donald Trump at number 78. Ed Tuttle, Emma Vaughn, Kimberly Vaughn Edwards, Grisanda Valdez, Anthony Valderez, Maritza Vasquez, Vicky Ward, Jerry Weisfield, Courtney Wild, Bruce Willis, are you kidding me? Daniel Wilson, Andrew Albert Christian Edwards, the Duke of York. And now that the names have been exposed, everyone is out to clear their name. Jeffrey Epstein's former attorney and friend, Alan Dershowitz, defended the late multimillionaire sex offenders associates, whose names were released as part of a court ruling by Judge Preska, one of the best in the business. None of us knew about his private life that he kept so secret, Dershowitz would say. The one-time Harvard Law School professor said in an interview with News Nation, Leland Vitters, that no one should be automatically convicted in the court of public opinion simply for showing up on Epstein's list. You could judge them for having shown bad judgment, but you can't conclude that any accusation against them are true without hearing the evidence. That are the words of a legal scholar running. An Epstein victim would say that former President Bill Clinton liked them young. Surprised that attorney Dershowitz was on the list? Virginia made it clear 2 decades ago that he had abused her, but would later recant that statement, saying she may have made a mistake when she named him as one of the men with whom she was forced to have sex. Was the recanting true? Dershowitz appeared several times in the flight logs of Epstein's infamous Lolita Express jet. Breathe, Epstein, breathe, while all those who are named are now having trouble breathing.